Okay, can you all hear me? Have you all? Can you hear me? Can you hear me? Excellent. You cannot hear me, but you can hear me, but you still put it on. Yeah, it makes sense. Have you all downloaded the app for today? Because that's how you're going to be able to ask questions. Okay, all good? Okay, fantastic. So yeah, thank you very much for coming also from my side. It's a beautiful day. I think we're going to have to work really, really hard so you don't just stare out of the window all day because it's such an amazing view, such a beautiful day today. I'm very happy to moderate this very first panel on the workplace of the future. It's a very interesting topic. Not all the workplaces look like this one yet. And I think there's a lot that can be done to make workplaces better than they are today. And we're going to look into next. Put your hands together for him. Morris, please come up. Come here. Then we have Mark, founder and CEO of Oceanics. Please, thank you. He's here. And Mick, who is head of the concept studio at WeWork. Sit down. Yeah, very cool. Okay, I'm just going to sit here. So Morris, let's start off with you. You guys are building phenomenal spaces for all kinds of very interesting clients. But before we look into what you're actually doing a little bit deeper, I would love to hear a little bit more about the context. So what is changing about how we work so radically right now that makes people like you and other smart creative people all over the world think about where we work?
Both buildings and workplaces. The one common thing that I see is the desire for places for people to come together. And I think that as the workplace is getting more and more open, the challenge is really to be able to focus into your
or new, more agile ways of working, or anything, the way people, are productive together, that you are really trying to work with when you're building offices. That's maybe different to 10 years, 20 years ago.
I not just specifically for workplaces, but I think that in general, on all of the projects that we're working on, there are spaces that people are trying to create, or our clients are trying to create a sense of community, a place where people feel comfortable, where they can come together, share ideas. I think that's the biggest change that we see.
Okay, and since we're talking about the future of the workplace, what are the things that you are building today, or where do you think, can we see what the future workplace might look like in what you're already doing or what we're already seeing today? Like, where's the horizon we can already see things happening?
Well, that was one of the reasons why I asked the question about people are working in traditional workplaces and maybe alternate workplaces. I think that there are no more rules. I think they're changing. I think we're going to hear from Mick about WeWork, and I think that they're definitely on the forefront of where things are going, and so I think should get him involved, but I'm sure. Yeah.
Okay, sure. Before we do that, maybe let's take a quick look at what you guys are building a little bit.
Okay.
Maybe you can go a little bit deeper into to some of the details.
Sure.
And then we'll jump right to Mick and let him comment on that, and maybe we'll see what he says about that. So let's start.
Next.
I think. Should I just give you the clicker and you can just work? Okay. All right. So where do we see the future of the workplace in what you're already doing?
So I organize these chronologically. This is a project that I worked on with the architect Aldo Rossi, 25 years ago, in Soho. It was the first new building in this historic district, really creating a workplace, or a series of workplaces for the children's book publisher Scholastic. And so then I move on to more recent projects, and I think there was a need to create places for people to come together, but I think that has changed over time. This is the first project I did on my own, was the Theory Building. One of the reasons they took the whole entire building, it became sort of a central sort of building in the Gansevoort Market Historic District, or the Meatpacking District. And they do tremendous number of events on the roof, and that was one of the things that was important to them. Here's a few slides. We also did this building, the Highline building on 14th Street. We've done a tremendous number of buildings in this neighborhood. But I think that also speaks to the types of buildings and neighborhoods where work is happening. I think that people had a certain impression of where office buildings were, and that has changed dramatically. And it keeps moving further and further away, and in more industrial or post-industrial neighborhoods. This is the Samsung building. We built this project inside a historic structure, and it was interesting because the people that looked at the building when it was getting built were companies like Ferrari, Tesla, Xenia. So it was a wide range of companies that really wanted to make a brand statement, and I think that was why they were attracted to this building. Oh wait, sorry, it's going backward. Oh, here it is. This is a small space that we did for Thrive Capital in the Puck building. Again, in a building that you might not normally consider for office space. And showing sort of the need for these private spaces or semi-private spaces where people could gather, phone booths or rooms where just a small gathering could happen, which contrasts with the open work plan. And I think that's becoming more and more challenging. I know in our office, we originally designed the space for, say, 80 people. Now we have over 100, and it's starting to get challenging. And you see more and more people putting their headphones on, and that's sort of against where I think that the office space should be about. I think people need to have that private space, but at the same time, you don't want to be in a situation where you're all disconnected. It's a new space, new building that we finished. Avenue School took about half the building, and Jay-Z's Rock Nation took the rest. They're going to put their a recording studio in there. And this is some of what the spaces look like. Those are renderings. Again, roof space. And then this is...
So, just one second. So you
Sure.
just mentioned that you are building more and more outdoor spaces, even for offices.
Sure.
Why would you say is that?
I think there's a need for sort of decompression space and alternative ways of meeting and gathering.
Okay.
Yeah, and I think also, connecting with nature. I think you're in a city and it's very tough sometimes.
Okay.
So, so this is a building. It's almost a bridge that connects these two circulation towers, and on 20. This is actually on 20th Street, and some big tech companies are looking to take this whole building. This is in construction now.
Okay. All right.
But this has 5 different outdoor spaces. Outdoor space on the roof that has open and covered space, spaces within that bridge-like structure, and then again on the high roof.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
And just some of the interior shots of that space.
So one other thing I would like
This is the last shot.
to see is that, so what you can see is that you have always very, very different elements within the spaces, and that seems to be one thing that they all have in common. So you're trying to build different niches for different needs of different people at different times. Is that correct? And is that something that we'll see even more in the future of the workplace, that the time of the cubicle is over and everybody will find his own or her own niche somewhere?
Yeah, I think that we definitely see that. We have phone booths in our office where people can go in and make a private call. Mm-hmm. But I also think there needs to be flexibility in being able to transform spaces for different uses during the day or during the year.
Okay. I think
that's a perfect segue. Can I just jump right in?
I don't even have to ask anything. Just go.
I'm just going to go. I want to take a photo of you guys too before this is over, just because I've never had an audience with headphones on, but
they're all listening to podcasts.
But yeah, exactly. They're listening to Priya now. She's driving back to Brooklyn. Thank you for having me, and this is a great panel group here. It's exciting, and coming right off of talking to or participating with Priya, I think it's a really interesting piggyback to what we just talked about. Mm-hmm. I'll take you on a short journey, a couple slides of the evolution of the office and how we at WeWork are thinking about what the next version or iteration of the office is. A lot of it is based on architecture and engineering, the evolution of the office. So before the 30s, a lot of office space was long, narrow buildings because of mechanical systems. We needed daylight on all 4 sides. We needed air to flow through the building. Ironically, those are the things we need now. But the buildings allowed for that. So we had these long, thin buildings. Then in the 50s, with the advent of faster elevators, better mechanical systems, better lighting systems, we were afforded the ability to go mod, right? And that allowed us the kind of open office plan, less columns, kind of a more efficient workspace with a better kind of homogenized space compared to what we had earlier on. Everyone realized, especially kind of the Herman Miller Knoll teams, realized that there was that homogenization was resulting in kind of an inefficiency, and so they developed the Action Office in the 60s and 70s. Ironically, cubicles weren't invented to be veal fattening pens. They were invented to be ways to create these different organic spaces. So the first cubicles were actually polygonal and hexagonal shapes that were reconfigured in interesting ways. That was the intent. Then you know what happened. The intent was distorted and compressed, and efficiencies were created, and we resulted in the cubicles that we all know and love today. Then something happened in the 90s, which is really interesting. It wasn't the office; it was the people that weren't working. So there was revolution in music and in fashion and in the arts, and that was put in front of all of us. So we all saw the misfits and the replacements and all of these people doing interesting things, Laurie Anderson and whoever, and we all wanted some of that. And so what happened was the workforce actually became disillusioned by the people that were living this kind of authentic selves. The early hipster, the early authentic lifestyle was actually the people that were revolting against the kind of norms. And it was really important because even Mike Judge in this seminal scene in Office Space, he actually made a conscious decision to have them breaking up the equipment in a field because he wanted it to show that he was out of the office. It wasn't in the office that they were disrupting. It was, let's get out of this place. You combine that need and urgency to do something different and be somewhere else with the lightning speed of change of technology, and it was inevitable that we were going to get where we were going to get, and what we're doing right now with firms like Morris and stuff, because the workplace could no longer be that 50s homogenized. Although, as an architect, trained as an architect, I still love modern architecture. I still love brutalist architecture. That's okay to appreciate it for when and what it was, but it doesn't create the kind of human connection. It doesn't create the space that allows us to have those connections and gatherings that Priya talked about even, which I thought was applicable. We try to take all of our space and really think about it as ways to create these collisions, and we talk about the collisions and the center of gravity a lot in the way we lay out spaces and determine our office space. So you'll see a lot of these transitional stairs become these moments with levels and change and stuff. But more importantly, I want to talk to you about how we get there. And I wanted to show you the work first so you could see that we really care about the quality of space. But I want to also talk to you about how we determine the kind of space that we get there. We really think of the office as something that we are learning from constantly. And what differentiates us from maybe a traditional architecture firm developer relationship is that they might be lucky to do several buildings with the same developer over the life of their time. We have 330 plus projects in our WeWork core offering, and 200 projects on the boards in our single office thing, which allows us to really gather data and tell you what makes you happy, which is ironic because we're not just doing it frivolously, we're really listening and learning.
That's also something we want to talk about a little later, right?
Yeah.
Okay. How
I won't go too much into happiness, but we do look at all of the spaces, and I'll go through this really quickly. I won't bore you with the text, but we look at all these spaces, and 4 years ago, 3.5 years ago, we developed our first set of kit of parts, and ironically, to create the scale behemoth that WeWork has become, we had to actually simplify the kit of parts as much as possible. So we went through this period where we said the 4-person office is this, the 2-person office is this, the 4-person conference room is this. And that was it. That was the standard that we rolled out globally, and it really helped us scale quickly. But then what we realized is when we went and toured all our 4-person offices, you can see the list on the right. Again, you can't read it. That's not the point. The point is those are all the activities that are occurring in a 4-person office. So we provide 4 desks, 4 chairs, 4 pedestals to every 4-person office. But really the activities that are happening in there is you have a guy doing tattoos. He just has a chair and his storage system. We have therapists with a sofa and a desk. We have a lawyer that has no furniture. He only has books, and he actually uses the hot desk area as the area where he works, and that's just his library. And you can imagine, just runs the gamut. And so what we really started to think about was that workplace in general, and I think Morris even started to touch on this when he talked about different ways of meeting, different ways of gathering. We're really now looking at activity and treating everything as an activity base. And so what are all the different activities that I can do in different types of spaces? So we've actually created this kind of crazy cataloging nomenclature system to really start to classify what a phone booth is, what are the different activities that can occur in a phone booth. How does that actually play out? Well, I said we had a 4-person conference room. We actually had 2 4-person conference rooms in our rollout for the last 3 years. We had the 4CR, 4 conference room, and the 4CR AV, and the only difference was the AV equipment. Now we're looking at all the activities that can happen in a conference room, and you can imagine there's the regular kind of video conferencing that might happen. There's you have to fire somebody, right? Yeah. What kind of space is that? Those are completely different spaces.
What does a room look like?
For firing?
Built for firing people.
It's all padded walls.
Soundproof. Soundproof.
Soundproof?
No, it's not. That would be horrible. That would be great for my office. That would be fun. But we're looking at like privacy. We are looking at lighting quality, lighting control, lack of AV. People don't want recording equipment. They don't want that kind of monitor, even if it's off, if they feel like they're being watched. And so you can imagine that was the list for 4-person office. It just goes exponentially greater when you start looking at an 8-person office or a 12-person office or a boardroom. And so we're now developing this kit of possibilities instead of kit of parts and saying, what are all the different ways that we can roll out spatial configurations that increase kind of the experience? And that's this kind of happiness quotient that we've been talking about, which we'll get into later.
Exactly. I mean, I think that's really something I would like to ask you is the why. So why have you been doing this? And I know that you have done a lot of research about what makes people happy and productive at workplaces. So maybe you can share a bit more about that, because I don't think that too many people are really happy at where they're working.
Yeah.
Both of you. And probably, it would be interesting to see what does make them happy.
I think you guys have probably all seen on LinkedIn and Instagram tons of stuff that gets sent around about like the open office is dead, or this research shows that introverts can't work in this kind of space. We have a massive research and data team, and I can tell you unequivocally that they're all wrong. It's not about that one or the other is better. It's allowing them, everyone, workers, members, options. It's allowing them the place to feel like they have privacy. It's allowing them the place to feel like they have connection. They want community. They want privacy. They want it all. It's looping it all into one solution. And so what we're finding is that we've done studies on happiness, and we have a really large research team that's made up of, MIT Media Lab grads and workers and scientists and research. I mean, it's an amazing team, and they've done all these studies on what makes people happy in the workplace. And the feedback we get now that we have such a huge member base, when we blast out SurveyMonkey, and the sample set we get back is incredible. We'll get sample sets back with 12,000 responses, which is amazing. That's a large return for surveys. And so we really start to understand what are the things they want. And things like flexibility, privacy, as banal as things like storage or better acoustics, those are the things that start to run the gamut on people that want private office as well as open office. So you start to see that there's similarities. So we're trying to figure out what the the kind of pragmatic, functional aspects are that make people happy, as well as kind of the mood and lighting and temperature and smell and plants and so then the other thing that we're doing is then we're kind of trying to spin it a little bit and flip it on its head and say, like, can plants be better acoustics? You know, like things that you normally wouldn't think about. So we have a lab that we're building right now, and we'll test that. We'll actually test, instead of putting acoustic material everywhere and then filling the room with plants and getting the air quality and the acoustic quality, can we do double duty and stuff like that? So we're playing with all kinds of stuff like that.
And that's actually a connection to what you've just said, you know, putting plants into the building and working with the nature, going onto the roof and so on. But before we get back to that, let's look at the next slide, or at your slide, Mark. Because talking about workplaces that make people happy, who of you would be happy to work there?
Well, I got to tell you what's in it. That's not fair. I mean, that's just a picture.
Okay, it only looks nice. It's actually very dangerous to be there. No, I'm just kidding. But yeah, please, if you could just explain to us, what on earth is that?
Thanks, Larson. Thanks for the invitation, and Morris for connecting. This is an incredible panel, and feel honored to be here. So, as I mentioned earlier in Priya's little social experiment there, I just moved to New York from a place that a lot of people consider paradise. So, French Polynesia, Tahiti, has always been portrayed, especially by Europeans, as paradise on earth. So, what would I be doing here? Why would I leave that? And the reason that drove me to this project of floating cities, so we're talking about sustainable, smart floating cities, entire cities at scale that'll grow, that will be sustainable and in harmony with the ocean. And what motivated me was, about 10 years ago, I was in government. I was always in the private sector, and one day got invited by the government to be Minister of Tourism, which is a sweet gig in Tahiti. Minister of Tourism was a great time, but
did you test all the beaches?
I tried. I could not accept any free trips, any free hotel rooms or anything like that. We're very conscious about that. But of course, I had to visit. I had to visit the whole country, find out what the bed and breakfast industry did, the cruise industry. But it was one day I remember with one of our advisors saying, "What's the sea level rise thing?" I don't know if you guys remember 2007, 2008. There wasn't a lot of talk. Inconvenient Truth, I think, was not out. IPCC report was years and years away. But in the Pacific, we were starting to notice this, but from firsthand experience. My brother's a pearl farmer out on small little islands. And, you know, over 20 years, you go, wait a minute, that beach used to be way out there, and now it's here. What's going on? So we did a quick review of the body of work that was out there on sea level rise. And we basically said, okay, what would happen to our industry? So French Polynesia relies primarily on tourism. So it made sense to find out what would happen under certain scenarios. So it was a disaster. So basically, if we had a 1 meter rise, even if it took 50 years, you had to start planning for that, because under 1 meter rise, you have no more airports. So we had 48 airports impacted, most of our hotels, all the electrical equipment. I mean, pretty much look at Manhattan with Sandy, right?
Out of the window, you can see what's, you know.
So some architects are working here on, putting up a big U around Manhattan. So this 10 years ago. So coming out of government, I said, look, this is a real thing. I mean, nobody was listening back then, but I said, what are the options for low-lying islands like ours? So not all islands in French Polynesia are going to be impacted. Most of them, the coasts, of course, but some of them are high islands. A lot of them are low islands, and we're not the only ones. And those islands will literally be uninhabitable by 2050. So 2050, I've got children, my son will be in his 40s. When these islands, he'll literally have to move away. Why are they uninhabitable? Because sea level rise will cause saltwater infiltration into our freshwater systems, our natural freshwater. So you have to move. There's no agriculture. So when I started 10 years ago to look at what the options were, there weren't very many. It was pretty slim pickings. It was either you evacuate, so you start thinking about how you slowly move people away from your country. And Kiribati is well known in the Pacific. They're our neighbors. They actually bought property in Fiji, so they could start moving their people out. The government of New Zealand, the new prime minister, one of her first bills she signed into effect was climate refugee status in the Pacific today. So this isn't 20 years down the road. This is now. So if you live in some of these low-lying islands, you can move. So floating cities. Yes.
How did you come up?
Thanks.
You know?
So I didn't come up with it. Floating cities, the idea of humanity living on the sea has been around for 100 years at least. You got one of the best, one of the most interesting inventors, architects, was Buckminster Fuller. So in the 60s, Buckminster Fuller was commissioned by a Japanese very wealthy man to do a floating city for 5,000 people in Tokyo Bay. Unfortunately, the patron passed away. The project was bought up by an organization here in the U.S., and it was never developed. So I looked at this and I said, what is the state of the art today? So it was about 10 years ago, started getting involved. 3 years ago, decided with some partners from Silicon Valley to start a company and start really looking at how we would deploy this. What is the state of technology today? So what I can tell you without any doubt, and I honestly I can say this, there's so many people now working in this field, countries. I think this is more a competition between countries than companies. You've got the Norwegians, you've got, of course, the Dutch, that you will see this. We will see this within the next 5 to 10 years, are completely sustainable, state-of-the-art smart cities that will actually be respectful of the ocean. A lot of the feedback I got in my country, where we're incredibly environmentally minded, saying, okay, so you're going to do the same shit you did on land, now you're going to do it on the ocean. How's that a good idea, Mark? The thing is, the ocean, if we treat it right, it really is the source of energy. So there's a number of sources of energy that the ocean, think about tidal, solar, wind, but also deep ocean water thermal energy conversion. There's all sorts of energy that the water has.
Okay.
Yes, Lars.
Quick question. You can always ask questions. Also, I don't know if you already tried to ask a question. Nothing came up here, but if you want to, you can do it through the app. Or you did try to? Okay.
Oops.
Yeah, they didn't reach me so far. If you just want to tell me your question, and we will just we will repeat it. Okay. They don't come up here. Sorry. Yeah. Sure. Okay.
That's a good.
All right. So let me just interrupt here for a second and work through the questions, because I was kind of wondering why there's nothing happening here. Now I know.
Maybe it's not connected.
Yeah, maybe it's not connected. Okay, sorry about that. So let me just pick a question real quick. Okay. All right. So one question I would like to ask before we move on over to like building and WeWork again is one last question to you. Well, I'm picking one. What is life going to look like there and work? So because I think for me this looks like a sci-fi thing. Only very rich people will be able to afford, and they will. Is this like the final frontier of gentrified living? The everything on Earth is kind of crappy, and so we're all moving to. We can't move to Mars yet, so let's move on these things. Yeah. So, what exactly is it going to be like on there? And
yeah, I quoted Buckminster Fuller not only because of the floating city, but his whole ethos of building for the 100%. So we're thinking about partnerships with organizations like I see the SDGs over here, UN Habitat. The idea is not that this is a resort for wealthy people. We will have failed if we did that. So no, the idea is low cost. So how can you build things like this at a low cost? Have 100% renewable energy. So no, absolutely would be a mistake to make just a Four Seasons resort on the water. No.
Okay. Right. No. Let's get to the questions. One is very, very good. They got like a lot of votes. Is as a former employee, we call the phone rooms, we talked about it a little earlier, crying rooms. So when designing workspaces, how do you give people a place to escape when they need one? So I think that's probably going to the both of you, or maybe.
Yeah, I think one thing I'd like to add, I think the workplace and the architecture is very important, but I also think the structure of the office and the way we organize, the way people come together is important. For example, we have breastfeeding rooms. We have rooms where we do massages twice a week in the office, so there's a room for that. We have these phone booths where people can go. Someone was crying in my office yesterday.
Oh.
It was all fine, but you
have to say that right now.
Yeah. It was a healthy cry. It was a healthy cry, but I think it was an opportunity to address some issues that needed to be addressed.
Okay.
But I think we create these spaces, but then I think we have to create the infrastructure within the office for those activities to occur.
Okay. So how do you plan for people who want to escape all the other people at the workplace for a moment?
I love the fact that you guys said earlier that you won't attribute anything said to the person said it on social media. So this is a safe place, so I can say these things.
You unlock.
And Julie wasn't here for that, but they said they won't quote anyone. We have an interesting problem with phone booths in that they are so popular that they become one-person offices. So what happens is people sign up at WeWork to be a member, and then they rush to work early, and they post up, right? It becomes their phone booth for the day. And so we, as a design team, are actually trying to create less comfortable phone booths, that's the thing you can't tweet. But there really is and what I mean by that is we're not going to do that with all phone booths. We will still have the Mercedes, but we want the Ford. And I think that's okay. And the reason we're doing that is we want to create the space where someone could stop in, make a quick call to the doctor, call the kids' school, check up on the daycare or the nanny, whatever they have to do, and still get out in the workplace. And not just be this home. Because what happens when it's a home is they're not designed to be full-time use 10-hour day spaces that you eat your gordita, Dorito gordito in. So they start to smell, they start to stain. And so we're trying to figure out what's the gamut of phone booth experience. We still want the crying booth, but we also want the kind of the quick call booth.
Okay. Next question is, what's your opinion on the research indicating that the open workspace model actually increases electronic communication? Where is the balance? I think we all know that people are wearing headphones and then they're chatting with each other constantly. So is that what you're aiming for when you design all these beautiful open floor spaces?
I would say that drives me crazy in my own office when people are emailing each other or Slack or any of these apps that they use to communicate. And we've created committees within the office to force people to come together. So we have ADA disability committee or a sustainability committee or women in design committee. And these are places where because our offices, we have about 100 people, so it's divided up into studios or groups. And this way we force people from different groups to come together, and then they can bring back that information. But I think it's a constant problem in an open workspace. So I see a lot of people with headphones, and I understand it, but at the same time, I don't know what the solution is, to eliminate that but we create these, I guess, places for people to or a bowling team, so to get people outside of the office and to come together in different ways.
How do you factor that in?
I think Morris and I are maybe a different demographic than a lot of the people that are using the email and Slack. And so, because I kind of would side with Morris personally, I like to get up and walk around and talk to everyone. But we know that it's happening, and so we're trying to figure that out. So I really like Morris's comment even about outdoor space being additional meeting space and gathering space, not just a break. It's a difference. We don't have as much of the outdoor space as the kind of leaseholder that's then creating office space for others. But where we can, we do that as well. We really believe that giving them these kind of other community spaces encourages that kind of communication. So the work itself, it's just the way that everyone's headed. They're on their phones, 42% of the time or something. It's also the number one deterrent for productivity is the phone. We know that from our research team. So when you're in meetings, like Priya talked about, it's the one thing that disrupts meetings the most. When you're having a phone call, it's the one thing that disrupts the phone call the most. So we are trying to look at how the office can become a tool for alleviating interruption. So as silly as it sounds, we're looking at things like general reminders. So if I'm in my office, the phone knows I'm in my office. it kind of goes into a rest mode, and the office tells me when there's a call with like a pulse of light. So I'm not looking at a screen, and I'm not changing up my conversation with my coworkers, so I can focus. So this idea of adjustment as opposed to interruption is something that we're working on too. So we have 4 initiatives all around reducing screen time right now.
I would like to pick one question that Mark, you will also be able to answer very well, I think, and that is, to what degree are you designing smart workplaces and buildings, and what does smart building actually mean to you? Because I know that you're of course not trying to build dumb islands, but very smart ones. So maybe you could give us an idea of what that might look like.
Morris, you must be one of those architects that hates the term, whoever came up with smart cities, because it makes, so what, all the other cities are dumb cities, right? So I can't remember who said it, but the future is now, it's just unevenly distributed. So where do you see where do you see the future of work? I would say China. I just came back from a 10-day tour of different cities in China to see how they're dealing with it. And this notion of smart cities or of connectivity is completely embedded now in this generation. So just some numbers. There's 400 million Chinese millennials. 400 million. They're hyper-connected. There's all sorts of studies. You have deep data sets. Tencent has 1 billion people, and their data sets are nuts. And they've been interviewing these young Chinese millennials. None of them expects to have a career. Not one expects to have a career and go, oh, I'm going to work 40 years at GM or 40 years at Tencent. They're looking at they're changing every few weeks. So what I'm trying to do for this project, aside from discussing with architects, interior designers, urban landscape architects, is really to try to, and with some futurists, is try to figure out what is this this generation, what's going to bring them together, and what's going to give them value in the workplace. And it's completely changed. And from what I saw in China, I can tell you it's worrisome on the one hand, the speed at which they adapt. Imagine a generation that over their lifespan, their GDP per capita went up 20 times. They're incredibly adapted to change. We resist. You don't want too much change. They thrive on change. So what is a workplace going to look? I have no idea, Lars. It's really going to be interesting.
But also, Mark told me, I want to say one thing, and then actually 2 things. Mark told me, I saw him yesterday, 2 days ago, that he saw a 57-story building constructed in 19 days in China that has a 3.6 kilometer ramp that goes from the bottom to the top. That's a dramatic shift in the way things are happening.
We're on the 52nd floor, right?
48.
48.
Yeah. But what does it make? That's not smart yet. That's just fast.
No,
the question was, what's the smart?
But there were a lot of things that were incorporated into the building.
Crazy smart.
Yeah, 8 different sorting chutes for everything from clothes to be recycled to compost, etc. So I think that things are happening very quickly, and from my point of view, we're not happening in China because I thought that they were just dumping pollutants into the water, into the air. But obviously, there's a tipping point that will happen soon. But I was just going to recommend one book called For Futures: Life After Capitalism, and it talks about the cross between technology, AI, robots, and the environment. 4 different sort of scenarios, 2 good ones and 2 very bad ones. But if we believe that the workplace is going to change and many people are not going to have jobs or are going to be replaced by AI or robots, what happens to our time? Are we just on a permanent vacation? And who owns those ideas that enable us to print that chair instead of having somebody fabricate it? So I think that would be something interesting to read or to expand your sort of thinking about the future and how we're going to be connected to it.
Mick, do you want to wrap up with your idea of what a smart workplace is, or what it might look like in the future?
I mean, we're trying to make the technology as seamless and go away as much as possible so that it is about human connection. But to do that, it's more technology, not less technology. So 62% of all meetings are 2 people or less. 62% of those meetings are using your own device for AV. So we don't need to have so many meeting rooms that are big, but if we do have a meeting room that's big and there's 2 people in it, and the meeting next door has 6 people in it and there's only 4 seats, can we alert the 2 rooms that they could switch places? You know, so we're trying to figure out, like, how do we do it in a way that's not invasive, but creates a better experience, right? And so we're working on that. We're working on, like, a way to kind of nudge you and say, why don't you guys switch? You know, using technology to let you know your meeting time is almost up, so that you don't have the awkward moment of the 3 people outside waiting for their room, because that actually creates this impression of a bad day. You know, there's this really interesting idea that you can have an amazing day for 8 hours, see loved ones, family, friends, productive, do whatever you got, and you trip over a computer cord, and when someone asks you how was your day, you say it was effing terrible, right? Even though all that happened. So we're trying to use technology to be that thing that isn't the cord tripping, but enables all those other connections.
Thank you so much. Morris, Mark, and Mick.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
3M.
3M, exactly. And yeah, stay with us if you want to hear more about the gig economy on the next panel, or go to the other stage if you like and put on the headsets over there. Thank you.